Oh, well, a good crowd in. So I hope I'm not too depressing a surprise for you. I am no David Tang. So hello, ni hao, nabusho chingwaren, wabusho ingwaren. Those are the only bits of Chinese I ever learned, which just means hello, I am not Chinese, I am English. Absolutely vital thing to point out. Now, I've been to China twice. A couple of years ago, I did a documentary about football in China, which is a big coming thing. And there's a point to what I'm saying here. About 20 years ago, I did a documentary, which was a railway journey going from Hong Kong through China to Mongolia. And I ended up doing that because we were trying to do something which was going to talk about Hong Kong. But everybody said, no, we've done too much of this on the BBC. So I luckily got to a meeting with Janet Street Porter, who was head of the features at the time. I can't do impressions, but she said, Clive, what you should do is one of them railway journeys. And she took a file off the thing and gave it to me. There you are, Hong Kong through to China to Mongolia. So, and that's where I met David Tang. And he very kindly agreed to do an interview with me. And he's got lots of places all around the world. The China Club, and we did an interview with him and lots of other people. So Janet Street Porter, I think, was right. I'd never have a word said against her to allow me to do this fantastic documentary. But the other people were also right, and they decided that Hong Kong wasn't as interesting as the rest of the trip. So nothing of Hong Kong appeared in the documentary, and nothing of my interview with David Tang. So this is a bad precedent for, so at least we're doing this live now, Nick, and therefore it can't be cut from anything because this is what it's in. So now as those of you, well, all of you here have come along to find out a bit more about Nick Mason, but you'll know an awful lot already, that he's a founder member, ever-present member and drummer of Pink Floyd, one of the all-time great creative progressive psychedelic underground rock pop music combos this country has ever produced. I'll give a few basic facts to be corrected if I get them wrong. Formed in 1965 for 5 decades and perhaps 3 somewhat different combinations, the Floyd, as I think we called them, came through a number of crises, but over the years enjoyed extraordinary critical and commercial success. A very British band, but which attracted worldwide fanatical support, based on an array of intense songwriting, musical and performing talent, but above all on the drumming skills of our guest here today.
Absolutely right.
Is it 15 studio albums you did? Something like that?
Something like that.
Yes, okay. 27 singles. Anyway, let's work out how you got going, how it got going. Because a lot of people think that rock music, pop music, has to come from poverty and difficulty. But you're all reasonably well-to-do people that got together to form the band Pink Floyd.
Yeah, we're all good middle-class boys, really. Yeah. I mean, my background was my father was a documentary filmmaker. I was born in Birmingham, but I managed to lose the accent. And I came to London with my parents and eventually decided to train as an architect because I couldn't think what else to do and it seemed to be good in general. Mm. And,
long course, though.
A long course, which is a very good way of putting off things like getting a job.
Yes. Yeah.
Which seemed important. But actually it was a wonderful training. I would thoroughly recommend it for anyone who wants to go into the music business. And it was all going quite well, actually. I actually did a 3 years, got a degree. I had some very smart part-time lecturers in the shape of Richard Rogers and Norman Foster. So it all looked well, and then I fell in with a bad lot, which was basically Roger Waters and Richard Wright, who were also on the same course. And we started a band, and we used our student grants. I mean, we were a sort of government-funded initiative, really. Because even the well-off got a basic grant, which was enough for a bass guitar or an amp or whatever was needed.
Now, why were you a drummer? Because you don't conform to some drummers, you know, the Keith Moon, the Wild Men.
I have my moments.
Yeah.
I have my moments.
Well, you're still alive, which is the main thing you've achieved. No, you know what I mean. Some
I know
drummers,
exactly what you mean.
yeah,
and
I mean, I've interviewed Ginger Baker twice, and I'm still here. So
God, you have lived. haven't
yes,
you? Yeah. Uh, just thinking about Ginger. It's
Yeah.
an enormous influence. I mean, the reason I'm here is because of Ginger. I saw the Cream at the Regent Street Poly, which was where I was training. And the sort of curtain went back, and there was Ginger in the middle of this band. And I just thought, oh, yeah, no, I'd like to do that. I was playing drums by then, but not that many drums. And I went out the next day and bought the second bass drum and the extra tom-tom, so I could look like that. But the main reason why I ended up as the drummer, really, is because when I was 13 or 14, we decided to start a band. None of us could play the instruments, and someone had already bought a guitar. So that left slightly reduced opportunities.
Well, I've heard people, not just in Pink Floyd, but certainly in Pink Floyd, saying this. Oh, we couldn't really play. You know, we just sort of. Was that the standard? Would you say in the '60s that people just you formed the band and then learned to play, rather than learning to play first?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean more than that. I think by the time we turned professional in 1967, the amount of time that we'd actually spent playing, because none of us, you didn't have lessons in electric guitar or rock drumming. It's very different now. I mean, I have a grandson who's now doing sort of grade, I don't know what, but he can certainly read faster than I can. And, I mean, music, that is.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary now. You can do grades in electric guitar, and you're doing Red Hot Chili Pepper tracks or whatever, or even Led Zeppelin tracks. This just didn't exist. So everyone was sort of self-taught, and then you learnt on the job. I mean, there's a whole thing about hours of playing and whether 10,000 hours gives you the ability to, you're pretty good by then. By the time we turned professional, I would have thought we'd only done, I don't know, 100 hours maximum. And after that, and
You've done the 10,000 hours since, so that's the main thing.
yeah,
While being paid for it, which
yeah,
is
absolutely.
But so you're in training to be an architect. You've done what, 5 years or so, something
Yeah,
like that.
I was just starting my fifth.
And
year
you decided that this is going well, playing in a band's going well, sufficient. I'm going to put on hold my architectural
Yeah.
career, or just abandon it altogether. How could you be so confident that it was worth chucking away 5 years of study?
I had the most brilliant yearmaster, a man called Joe Mayo, and he invented the gap year for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't something that, and yes, I am now in my 51st gap year. It's a pretty weird experience. But he just said, look, take a year off, give it a go, because we'd got to the point where actually my friends were signing me in for lectures that I wasn't attending, and I could see this was heading for a bad place. So I went to him and said, look, we've got this band. It appears to be sort of operating, because the big thing then was if you had almost any work at all, you were an operating band. And he said, fine, you can come back in a year. Gone
Okay.
a bit over time on that.
It's gone well, but I mentioned you've had some, I mean, I don't know if ups and downs are the right way of putting it, but now, was it your very first single, Arnold Lane? Was that your very? I know
That was, yeah. That
Sir
was
Tom
the first.
Shabir was reminiscing about it. But it's a very unusual single. I mean, there'll be plenty of people who know it fully well. But it was at the time it was an a song about a man stealing ladies' underwear off shopping lines. That wasn't the standard way of.
No, no.
It wasn't boy meets girl. It was boy meets girl's underwear. It's not quite the same thing, is it?
And generally, we've spent the last 50 years not being able to do boy meets girl. But
Yeah.
it's all been a bit more depressing than that.
Yeah.
No, we had a very quirky songwriter and frontman in the shape of Syd Barrett. And it's fairly well documented. And I imagine most of you know the story of Syd sort of really failing after about a year. I say failing, basically, we still believe that it was to do with LSD and too much acid, but he also maybe just realized he didn't want to be in a pop group, actually, and we couldn't believe that, so we kept somehow assuming that everything would work out, and eventually there was a point at which it stopped working out and we had to carry on without him. And funnily enough, the thing you asked about, this extraordinary confidence that meant that we carried on. We lost our main man, and I've seen it in other bands. I mean, I think Genesis have been through that, Fleetwood Mac have been through that. That thing where you somehow have a confidence in the overall shape of the band rather than just the individual.
So it's the group identity, or even a brand, which is stronger.
Brand
than
is now a very accurate word.
I want to ask about another early record of yours before other people have even more precise questions. But See Emily Play. Is the Emily in that? Is that Emily Young, who's now a sculptor, the best respected sculptor in the country, really? Was that about the young Emily Young?
I don't know, is the
answer. Oh, no, Nick, don't say.
Okay, it was. But I can't be absolutely certain of that one. I've heard that that's the case.
Did you know Emily Young as a girl?
No.
I think she was called the psychedelic schoolgirl, wasn't she, or something like that? I'm not implying anything inappropriate, Nick. I'm just...
it's just good for such good notes.
It's just good for quiz questions if you can say who is the Emily in the Emily.
Too many
play.
pub quizzes.
Clearly, it's no good if you just say, "Well, I don't know." You're one of the few people who might know.
Yeah.
Or might pretend to know for the purpose of entertainment today.
I'm trying to do this properly and not just make it up.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So, all right. So, because Syd was no longer available for being in the band and for writing more, as you say, you carried on. But did you have a sort of, were you worried, were you doubtful, or this, presumably people around you, managers and agents and record companies, were thinking, oh, blimey, what's going to happen now?
Well, a couple of things. The managers definitely were worried and decided to manage Syd and not us. But fortunately, there was someone else who stepped in. We didn't want to worry the record company with this information, so actually we went for about 6 months without bothering to tell them, which I think was the right decision.
Yeah, and so you had Dave Gilmour from that point, or well, roughly that point onwards. Did that change it as far as you were concerned, as far as drumming and so forth?
After the problems of working with Syd, who didn't really want to be there, the arrival of David was fantastic. We did about 5 shows as a 5-piece, and then finally Syd was gone. And we carried on playing Syd's songs for the next 4 to 6 months, I guess, while we made the next album, which was mainly the material that was written by either all of us or primarily Roger.
Yeah, so Roger Waters kind of took over the songwriting, and that worked happily for a while?
It worked happily for quite a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And but I'm sort of racing through a bit, but eventually he wanted to go his separate way, or you wanted him to go.
I think it was a bit slower. It was slightly more sort of convoluted than that, but he certainly wanted more and more control, and probably should have, maybe for his own sake, gone off on his own earlier, but didn't. But on the other hand, that sort of friction of working together, I think is part of the reason why we actually made the records we did. And I think although everyone would love us to get back together and be the Monkees and run about at double speed, it's not really an option. And I think one has to accept that that's one of the reasons why some of the good work gets done. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Fleetwood Mac will probably confirm that. Their best album, Rumours, is all built around the various relationships going right or wrong within the group. So maybe that is necessary. But again, it sounds, it's good looking back and saying, oh, well, this happened. But presumably at the time, you might have been thinking, oh, what's going to happen now? There's going to be legal disputes, and he wants to keep his songs, and we still want to be Pink Floyd. Was that a period of anxiety for you?
Yeah, it was. It was an interesting one but it was the same thing that after the fighting, when you can just get on with making the music or going on tour or whatever, you really enjoy it. And actually, after Roger went, the tour after that was probably one of the it was certainly the longest tour we ever did.
I suppose you're best known, well, not best, if you're particularly known for the spectacular nature of your concerts. As the years went by, they got bigger and bigger. Can you describe why that was the case? What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I think the reasoning behind it was actually, it was where we more or less started. When we were, before we were even professional, one of the gigs that we had fairly regularly was providing music or sound effects for a course at Hornsey College of Art, which was run by a guy called Mike Leonard, who was a part-time lecturer at the Regent Street Poly. And so we'd sort of already done a little bit of work with light shows and light machines and so on. But I think when we started, when we turned professional, that was one of the things that we did. We had these oil slides and we had various sort of lighting systems. That became part of what we were and who we were. And there was the whole thing about psychedelia and creating this extraordinary sort of visual aspect to it. And it worked, and we found a niche for ourselves. And it was a niche because everyone else assumed that it was all about wearing tight trousers and gambling about on stage, which we were never very good at.
So was it a way of distracting the audience into the show rather than concentrating on you?
I'm not sure about distracting. I think actually, particularly in the big shows, by the time we get into the stadium situations, what you're trying to do is get everyone to concentrate. You know, the biggest problem with a really, really big audience is you've got 5 or 6 rows who are absolutely beside themselves with excitement, and then gradually it ends up with the people who are doing drugs and playing frisbee. And
yeah, I wonder if you could stop doing that at the back there. It's, there is a mirror, we can see you. It's, what about your other, all that association with the moon, the dark side of the moon? I think you played live, didn't you, during a moon landing on the television?
Yes, we did. Though sadly, this is a bit like Emily Young. I absolutely have almost no memory of it whatsoever.
Were you at the back playing frisbee, Nick? You don't remember playing live on television while men landed on the moon?
No. I'm not sure.
That was a duller day in your life.
Yeah, it's a shame, really, isn't it? Just all that one big step for mankind, and actually I thought he'd gone out for a pizza.
How did the dynamic of the Pink Floyd work at its various stages? You wrote or co-wrote some of the songs you did. Was that did you get together to write songs, or everyone bring in things? How did it work?
I think the co-written things tended to be improvised in the studio. Otherwise, generally the way it worked was that Roger would go away, and certainly with Dark Side, he went away once we'd decided what the issues were, or what the subjects were, and then sometimes the music was put together in the studio. Sometimes David or Roger or Rick even would come in with with the song ready prepared. There was no formula. We worked in whatever way we could, and I think would have loved to have found a formula for working. What would tend to happen is that we'd finish one project, and it took a very long time really to regroup and get back into the next one.
Did you get any trouble from teachers, from another brick in the wall? We don't need no education teacher, need them kids. I mean, you highly educated people on stage singing about the horrors of education.
I think if you see it in context, it's about a style of teaching, and in particular the business of corporal punishment. And can I ask, have many people here been to the exhibition at the V&A? Oh, thank you so much.
I went to it, knowing I was going to be doing it. I hadn't got around to it. I went to it on the second to last day. I couldn't get in. my naivety thought I could stroll in about 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon and say, oh, yeah, I must need to get that. And they said, no, you wait in that queue over there for return tickets.
Did you get in?
I didn't get in, no.
Oh,
I claimed that...
I could have got you in.
I know, but...
I really could. I've actually got a pass from the V&A.
So does this mean I can't see it? Is it ever going to be seen again, this exhibition?
Well, good news, Clive. No, it has finished at the V&A, but we are moving it to Italy next.
All right.
Opens in Rome sometime mid-January, I think.
Mid-January in Rome.
And then it'll go to Germany, hopefully then on to New York, and then we'll bring it round to your house.
Well, thank you very much. But you've been quite a meticulous collector of memorabilia and things to do with Pink Floyd over the years.
Yes,
Is that fair to say? You
but
yourself.
not in a very expert way. I just wanted to finish one thing about the business of teachers, because one of the items that's on display in the exhibition is the cane that was used to punish Roger when he was a schoolboy.
Yes. And he never forgot it.
No.
But how did he get the cane? Did he snatch it from the teacher's hand and run away?
No. It was supplied by the school, I think. Kept it.
It
wasn't on eBay.
They've banned corporal punishments. They've got nothing to do with these canes anymore. You might as well have them for your exhibition. And before I'm going to hand over to the room to ask you questions, but since we're here at the China Exchange, I just wonder, in your world travellings, how many times, or did you ever get to the Great Wall in China or other parts of China?
No, we never did. I mean, it's something I regret, because we really did our last sort of big tour about 20 years ago, and most of our touring was fairly unadventurous compared to what has now opened up. I mean, we did hardly any South American touring, very little. We played Russia, but very little of Eastern Europe. No, I'd have loved it. I think probably Japan was really the only sort of Far East market for us at the time. And as I say, it's one of my regrets, really, that we didn't have the opportunity.
And as I say, just before I throw over to the room, now the other thing people will know about you is you've got a huge collection of motor cars, racing cars, things
Yes.
like. Have you got sort of hangars full of them? Roughly how many cars have you got? Nick?
Sort of 40-ish.
40-ish.
Yes.
And these aren't minis and things.
No, it's not a sort of...
They're racing cars and Bentleys and
Yeah.
Ferraris and such like.
Yeah, mainly older cars. No, it's not exactly the sort of collection of Uber specials.
No.
But I was very lucky. I started a long time ago. And in fact, with my ill-gotten gains from Darkside, more or less went straight to the car dealers.
Yeah.
And at the time, I looked like a complete idiot, but now I look fairly smart.
They've gone up in value, right? Yeah.
They have.
Yes. So what do you do? Do you just sort of polish them every day, or do you just sit behind the wheel going vroom, vroom? What's the... I know you do drive them in. You've been in Le Mans and everything. You've competed in Le Mans.
I've just really enjoyed the whole thing of running them and racing them. My family all race, and I'm sort of heading for retirement now, having spun one car particularly badly recently at Goodwood. I think that was a sort of marker that maybe time to slow down.
Was that a racing car or a vintage car?
It was a racing car, yeah.
Well, they are built for, 25-years-olds really to race with, aren't they?
Yeah, no one explained that.
Okay, well, having suggested there be questions from the audience, we've got, people with microphones. Oh, right, there's a first hand up there, and that'll be your second one. All right, well, if you wait for a moment, I'll come to you. We've got the microphones close to those two questioners there, so we'll do those two first, and use it. Carry on.
Out there in the cold, getting lonely, getting old, can you feel me? And hey you, would you ever consider working with a soprano again?
Well,
seems like a really good idea. Yeah.
I think we should get together afterwards, yeah? My friend...
This is
I've
more of a
been
question we're looking
propositioned
for, not
before,
a...
but this is a really good one.
This is not Tinder. This is...
I have a message. I also have a message. Jackie St. Clair, who's a really good friend of mine, she passes on her love. She was also at the V&A and also modelled for one of your covers of Dark Side of the Moon, I believe, yeah?
Yeah.
It's no good asking Nick, he won't remember it.
No, I'm sorry to
No,
start with that one, but yeah, you know, it'd be interesting to know if you would consider, you know, working in the future with a soprano, because I know your music's very experimental, so...
Well, I think one of the things that's been great about the band and what we've done and so on is the business of working with other people. And that's one of the nice things about the V&A exhibition, was an opportunity really to recognize, I mean, less so with the music, more with the graphics and the staging and so on, all the great people we've worked with. But actually, all the people who've contributed, musicians who've played on tour, saxophone players, singers and so on, they always bring something extra to the party.
Well, you've set a very high bar for the questioning. Not everybody has to break into song. But there was another question right by you. Yes, please.
Thank you, Nick. Are you most creative when you're spaced out?
Reasonable question, because everyone assumes that somehow everything was done under the while we were actually tripping. And I think probably we were the most, in many ways, extraordinarily straight. Because certainly performing, I think it's not a great thing to be spaced out or high or whatever. Anything. Some of the worst shows I've ever seen generally involve someone, at least one person doing cocaine and someone else doing some sort of downer. So that there's this really quite extraordinary thing, and particularly when it comes to tempo.
But how was it in Pink Floyd, though?
Very, very staid.
If your inspiration was Ginger Baker, then I'm not to speak badly of him behind his back, but it's possible he's occasionally had a bit of Pro Plus before going on stage.
I think even without the Pro Plus, he could behave appallingly.
Okay, there was an enthusiastic hand up there that we just avoided because of the microphone. Yes,
I'd
please.
like to ask you about the Live 8 concert. Was it an easy decision for you to get back with Roger?
Oh, brilliant question. Live 8.
8.
You can remember that, surely.
Remind me. Live 8 was absolutely terrific. I quite often say it was perhaps one of the best shows we ever did, not in terms of musicality or the show itself, but just for doing something for the right reason. And I still feel that not only for the sort of greater audience, but just even to just show my children that we were capable of doing, of arguing and then actually getting together and doing something for the right reasons. And tribute to Bob Geldof that he sort of came up with the idea and actually managed to get us all to do it. So
was it quite a diplomatic job to get you all on board? Or
it was a hell of a diplomatic job to get us all on board. Well, I say all of us. What I mean is Roger and David, actually. Basically, David didn't really want to do it. And what happened was that Bob, who's very persuasive, had absolutely failed with David. And he rang me up and he said, would I talk to David? And I said, that will do no good whatsoever. He said, the only person I think who could persuade him to do it would be Roger. And so Bob said, all right, well, I'll talk to Roger then. What's his number? So I told him, then I felt that it was my duty to warn Roger that this was going to happen. And I'm particularly good at a sort of slightly diplomatic, not exactly saying what's going to happen, but just saying, I think Bob might be going to call you. And Roger rang David and said, look, really, I'm up for it. Let's do it. And that was it. And I have to say, we rehearsed quite hard for it. And the rehearsals were as much fun as the show itself.
But did any of the sort of rivalry or whatever it was that had split you apart, did that sort of bubble up again? So, oh, you always come in too fast on that bar there.
Not really. There was a good line from when Rick turned to Roger and said something like, well, you know, the way we do it now is we play it at this tempo or whatever.
Yeah.
Roger looked at Rick and he said, what you do in your private life is into your own business.
And at the end, I mean, it obviously worked really well. Did you all sort of hug each other and feel,
Yeah.
what have we done? We should have been together? Because you didn't
We didn't.
rejoin, did you? So,
No.
no.
No, we didn't. But I think we were pleased to have done it. Everyone was, and we enjoyed playing it. And it was obviously great for the audience. And it was interesting that Led Zeppelin also did a sort of a get-together and then did not go out on tour for the next 10 years.
So it was good for that event and for that
Yeah,
fundraising.
I think for the moment.
And for Bob. Okay, yes, very good question. Gentleman there with the watch, well, there's certainly a watch I can see. I think it may be attached to you or not, I don't know. But yes, sir.
It's a bit deep, this one. Did either you, David, or Richard share the same kind of melancholic opinions on the human condition as Roger?
I think Roger's view of the world is unique, and his writing is extraordinarily powerful. And I don't think, some of David's songs work really well. High Hopes for me is still one of my favourites of our catalogue. But I think the really extraordinary thing about Roger's writing is that he wrote some of the elements of Dark Side when he was a sort of 20-something-year-old, and almost more relevant to a 50 or 60-year-old than they are to a younger man. I think on a more general level, there's an interesting thing that both from the Cambridge sort of connection, David's parents, Roger's mother, my parents were all fairly left-wing. My dad was a member of the Communist Party in the 50s. But I think Roger absolutely is a product of perhaps a more extreme life story, you know, with a grandfather who was killed in the First World War and a father killed in the Second World War. I think that has some element to play on how he writes.
Which is it's an unusual approach, I suppose, compared to some aspects of popular music.
Well, as you said, normally it's boy meets girl,
Yes.
and I love you, love you, I love you.
Or the sadness of breaking up rather than
Yes, rather
universal
than
angst. But
mortality.
Yes, sir. Question. So, yes, you sir. I'll come to you in a minute.
Hello, Nick. Do you get the same highs, no pun intended, from playing live for Pink Floyd as you do from driving around Le Mans in a classic racing car?
They complement each other. They're very different. It's not the same at all. I mean, unless the audience is particularly angry, they're not nearly as dangerous as... the risk element is higher motor racing. But I really like the difference almost. And I think perhaps because of the drama aspect of it, a drummer cannot operate on his own. Well, he can, but the chances of selling tickets for a 2-hour drum solo, a bit remote. And so to do something which is entirely about you on your own in a car is a rather good way of, as I say, of complementing what's going on the rest of your life.
But to enjoy motor racing, do you need to have that thrill of possibly crashing? Have you got to have that danger?
I don't know. It must be some small part of it, because you are trying to go as fast as possible.
Go to the limit.
So, but you, well, obviously, if I thought I was going to crash, I probably wouldn't do it. So there's a sort of sense that you're in control.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yes. Question there. Yes, please.
Hi, Nick. Do you keep in touch socially with David and Roger? Do you drop them a text, or is it just business?
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, I probably see more of Roger than of David, although I'll probably see David next week. But Roger, when I am in America, I'll nearly always make the effort to go and find him or go and see him or whatever. They are still pretty well my oldest friends.
Well, that's what sometimes fascinates the rest of us when groups come together. You generally are friends, and if there's a falling out, it's more like not a lover's tiff exactly, but it's more intense than just workmates not working together again. So how do you cope with that as your life develops?
Great difficulty. It's.
I mean, you were in legal dispute with Roger for many years, weren't you?
Yeah. I suppose you find a way out of it eventually. Or you don't. I mean, there are plenty of bands around who haven't spoken to each other the last 20 years or whatever. But I think you look for an opportunity to build some bridges.
Okay. Oh, yes, a question right from the front. Perhaps you could do it without a microphone. Oh, no, it's coming anyway, just to...
Hello. I'm curious to know what type of music you like listening to now, or if you have a favourite album at the moment, or something like that.
I think I'm rather stuck in... I think like a lot of people, you tend to get stuck with a period of music where you first discover it or it has a major influence on you. So I still tend to be stuck with Jimi Hendrix, Cream, Joni Mitchell, whatever. And I'm really not very good at listening to new music and young bands and so on. Bruce Hornsby and the Range, I still like, and I still have a hankering for modern jazz and people who can play things that I can never hope to emulate, which is particularly those sort of bebop drummers and so on.
And which period of Pink Floyd's music do you like the best?
Well, I'm keen on all of it, really. I don't really have a favourite.
No, you don't feel the early stuff, or that was juvenile stuff where we were learning, and now we got into a blistering period, and then we went off. You just the whole range is good.
No, yes, I'm afraid so. I recommend this product absolutely. The whole lot. I think, funnily enough, I certainly don't listen to things that we've done unless there's some reason if we're going to play it again or whatever, and I need to actually relearn it, which happens. I'm quite interested in the second album, Source Full of Secrets, because I think there's a lot of ideas there that we almost didn't recognize at the time. And there's one song, Set the Controls, that I think was an extraordinary transition for Roger's writing in terms of the one song he'd done on Piper at the Gates of Dawn to this song, and then the title track, which is really quite a complex piece of music. And I think it is a pointer to where we were going to go much further down the line.
Do you think he always would have been a songwriter, even if Syd had stayed writing songs, stayed with you?
Good question, and the answer is I don't know. I suspect so. I think he probably wouldn't, because I think if Syd had stayed, we probably would have had a shorter shelf life, and Roger would not have wanted to go back to architecture.
Okay. Well, it's just these odd events. You mentioned Phil Collins, I think, in passing, and he was drumming, and then because they didn't have a singer, he stepped forward and took over the singing.
Yeah, I never had the opportunity. I know that's. I could see where you're tracking with this one.
No, there are two aspects. There are two parts to that question. First of all, that was the opportunity happened to open up him, and it might not have been the case. He might have carried on being the drummer, never being the singer. But as you're hinting at, there's another part of that. What about you? Had the opportunity arisen, would you have liked to have stepped forward and taken over the vocals?
No, absolutely not. Having to stand up and walk up,
Was it for a couple of hours?
No, I'm very happy with where I ended up.
All right, we've got another question at the back there.
Apologies for the question. Have you ever made love to one of your songs before?
Well, have you? Have you ever made love while one of your songs was performing?
No. I can say that because it would have been such a distraction. Oh, there's that drum part again. No. Making me a little giddy thinking about it.
You know, I was thinking maybe Division Bell wouldn't be a particularly word. No, but no, that's a weird question. That's yes, here, and I'll come to you later. But yes, the microphone's coming. There we go.
What advice would you give to young bands who are starting to take music seriously?
Well, first of all, I have to start with the most wonderful piece of advice that was given to young musicians by Noel Redding, who was the bass player with Jimi Hendrix. And if you've heard me say this before, I'm sorry. But he said, study law and buy a gun. But he had a particularly tough time.
Yeah.
What I would say is I think the landscape now makes it far more difficult for young musicians and young bands than it ever was 50 years ago. There was such a sort of straightforward ladder almost. You needed the three cards, which were management, agent, and record deal. But the record companies were constantly looking for new ideas, new music, and it didn't cost them very much to invest in putting a record out. So that was the way forward. Now, the record companies simply, well, they will invest, but they won't invest until you're already halfway there. It's as though someone's pulled half the rungs out the ladder. I think you have to be very, apart from making good music, you also need entrepreneurial skills, because you need to find new ways of getting people to listen to your music. And that's really hard, because it's fine. You can put it on the web very easily. But how you then tell people it's there is really difficult. So I suppose the answer is you have to just try and investigate every possible way of getting that music listened to.
But the one thing I suppose modern musicians have, music makers know, is that they can see that people have had a career, you can have a long career. Whereas when you started out, I mean, could you foresee that anybody was going to be still playing music in a group or something in a year's time, 10 years' time, let alone 50 years or whatever it is?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's recently been a movie out 8 days a week about the Beatles, a lot of early Beatles material, and there's Ringo saying that he's going to open a chain of hairdressers.
Yes.
And I seriously thought a year or so and I'd be back at college. You're quite right. It was unthinkable that all these funny old pop groups would last for longer than a year or two.
But I suppose your modern point is that nowadays you can't make the money immediately. I don't know, had you already made a lot of money out of the first couple of singles? Was that enough to...
No. We didn't make any real money until 5 years. It took 5 years. And Dark Side was when we actually really saw some royalties ourselves.
Right.
Because before that, we tended to be putting money back in, equipment in particular, but also touring America. The first American tours wouldn't get near to making money. It was a sort of investment.
And did you have people you trusted, managers,
yeah,
promoters?
lots of people we trusted, rather unwisely.
All right, should have got the gun and the legal degree. Yes, I'll come to you in a minute. Yes, gentleman there. Please.
Hi, Nick. Just two questions. First one is, you said that you spent your money on your 250 GTO or whatever, but Roger Waters also bought a Daytona. Was that down to you, or?
I don't remember Roger buying a Daytona.
It's burnt out anyway. It went up in flames last year in Australia.
Oh. No, I definitely...
This is well-researched questioning, if I may say so.
See me afterwards.
Yes.
I'll put it in my book. No, I think I definitely was buying unsuitable cars quite a long while before the others. I think David had a couple of cars. Later on, everyone, it was sort of necessary. If you're in a rock band, you needed a country house and you needed some cars to go in the garages.
I thought there was a trout farm you're supposed to have.
Do you know what? I must make a note of that.
And you do you fly helicopters as well? Is that,
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
It's a tough life, isn't it, being a rock star?
Surely we've all got a helicopter. No.
You said you had 2 questions, but that was... Oh, hard luck.
So Steve O'Rourke did a lot of things to keep you all talking together during the latter stages of your career with Roger Waters.
Yes, I mean, well, basically he sort of tried to manage an impossible situation, but that's what managers do.
Okay, well, we've moved on from you now, I'm afraid. So the gentleman there with his hand up, microphone's coming from the back of you, which is not the best way to put a microphone, but there it is. Yeah.
One album that didn't seem to feature very largely in the V&A exhibition was Atom Heart Mother, and I just wondered whether there was a particular reason for that.
You're not Ron Geeson, are you? No, I think we covered Atom Heart Mother. I think there's sort of quite a lot of reference to the fact that the album, before we actually made the album, we actually played the piece live quite often without any of the orchestra sections on it, which was sort of interesting in its own way. I suppose I do feel slightly that both Umaguma and Atom Heart Mother were sort of cul-de-sacs for us. They were interesting, but they weren't part of our, what I'd call general development if I was in education. No, I sort of felt as though that it was recognized and it was interesting. I mean, it's easier to see the flaws in Atom Heart Mother than most of our other albums. And just to give you an example of that, why it doesn't come high on my favorite list, is that we knew we were preparing to lay the orchestra sections down on the backing track. But when we made the backing track, EMI had just taken delivery of these new tape machines with this 2-inch tape on them. And a directive was issued that said, these tapes must not be edited. This meant that Roger and I had to do the entire backing track in one take, which was, I'd describe it as erratic. We didn't use a click track because we thought that would make it too severe. So we set off on this sort of 20-minute journey of bass and drums, more or less on their own. And I can still hear it sort of tempo moving around a bit in a way that makes me feel very vaguely seasick.
I don't think they use that sort of tape anymore, do they, for this sort of recording? But how was that how do you find working with orchestral players? Was that good fun or a good challenge or what?
Initially, it was hard work because we're talking quite a long time ago now, and session players rather looked down on these pop groups, and there was that feeling that because we didn't read the notes, we weren't sort of proper players. So they could be a bit stuffy, I think would be the right word. And there's still brass players particularly have a reputation of being tricky, and I'm still rather fond of, a little while ago I was doing something with Jules Holland, and we were doing a version of Interstellar Overdrive, and it's got this, it sort of works its way around to sort of verses and choruses. And I said to Jules, well, we'll just, we'll keep it rolling in 16-bar sequences until we get bored. And this brass player looked at me and he said, oh, just once then.
Yes, got you there. Yes, please, sir. Yes, the microphone coming to you.
Hello, Nick.
Hi.
Hello. I really would like to congratulate for the solo you've done on in Freedom with George Jokin. Is there a gig you like particularly for a certain reason? Live gig.
A particular gig.
A particular gig.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about Live Aid. I think anywhere that's slightly unusual, slightly interesting. I mean, one would have to mention Venice as perhaps the most extraordinary event, but it was quite, it was a fairly epic business to get it actually done properly. We managed to fall out with both the city council and the gondoliers, which didn't really help, but it was still lovely to have done that show and Chantilly. I suppose the other one would probably be something like the first times we played Dark Side and actually utilized film and fireworks and and the aircraft that came from the back of the auditorium crashed into the stage. Something where we took a step forward is always are the memorable ones.
Were you ever frightened of being overwhelmed by all these effects and visual displays?
There was an element of physical danger occasionally when the pyro got out of control, but otherwise, no, because it's your show. So actually, the bigger the bang, the more the audience might go, wow, what's that? The more you feel it works. Again, as I said earlier, you want them to focus on what's happening on stage, whether it's that, the magnificent drummer or whether it's a piece of film footage. Doesn't matter.
And when you go past Battersea Power Station, does your heart leap?
I always check the sky.
Yes, sir. There. I'll go to you first, and then you at the back afterwards. So the microphone's coming here. Yes. Thank you.
Whose idea was it for Pompeii, and whose was the poor dog in that film?
It wasn't a poor dog. It was a perfectly happy dog. I've met a number of dogs since who are always enthusiastic to join in. For anyone who doesn't know, it's referring to a track where we have a dog howling along with a blues track. I'd love to be able to say that Pompeii was my idea, but rather sadly it wasn't. It was actually Adrian Marbin, the director of the movie, who came up with the idea, and we were all a bit sort of sniffy about it, couldn't quite see it working, but now I think it's the most wonderful thing, because there's almost nothing of us playing together in that sort of period, because no one had video cameras, or if they had, I guess, Super 8 with no sound on, so there's virtually nothing of us playing in period, whereas that is actually properly recorded and properly filmed. And it was a very clever balance, because the venue of Pompeii was sort of gritty with the wind and the air full of dust and so on. So that gave it a sort of live flavor without the problems of having to work to an audience who would not have been happy if you were going to cut and edit and stop and start again and so on. So Adrian Marbin is the man who has to take credit for that.
And did the dog get any royalties from the recording?
Oh, God, where are we going now? Do you know what? I've had enough trouble with the Islington Green kids, let alone the dog.
Well, presumably Islington Green
The
School
dog
is
the dog does not have a lawyer or manager.
Presumably Islington Green School is kept funded in perpetuity by royalties.
Definitely, definitely.
Well, would be if it hadn't all gone to your cars. So, yes, your question there.
Hello there. I really enjoyed the interview that Brian Johnson from AC/DC did with you recently. A couple of questions. Did you let him drive any of your cars? And also, who had the better rock and roll stories, would you say?
I'd have to say Brian Johnson. He's got terrific stories, all told in a Geordie accent, cackling along as he tells them. He's a full-on entertainer, that Brian. I've been very happy to, actually, I would have been happy to have let him drive any of the cars, because he's a reasonable driver, or that's what I thought at the time. Since then, he managed to roll a car at Silverstone that belonged to a friend of mine in the A35 race. But since my daughter also managed to roll the similar car, what can one say?
Yes, any more questions? I don't hear you pointing out, but let's go with that, whoever that is. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, going back to your set designs, as a former architectural student, were you ever tempted to get involved in Mark Fisher's designs?
Well, not really tempted, because Mark was so good at it. I think the cleverest thing we ever did was sort of discover Mark and start working with him. Because Mark Fisher, who very sadly died a few years ago, but Mark not only did the most fantastic stage designs for us, but was involved in the way the wall worked and the way the wall was assembled and then collapsed. He was also involved with inflatables, pyro, whatever we did, he'd have a view of, and was able to add something more to it. So it's one of those, again, it comes back to what I said about working with other people. And one of the great things about any sort of success is the more successful you are, the better the quality of the people you can work with. And Mark absolutely was one of the great assets to us.
Yes, yes, sir. There's a question there, and then from you next. I'm just trying to work where the microphone is closest to. Yes, please.
Thank you. Hi. I see Roger is headlining the BST Festival at Hyde Park. Are we going to see any more Pink Floyd shows in the future?
Who knows?
Well, you might.
Yeah. As yet, I've no idea whether what the future holds. I love playing. I love playing with Roger. Love playing with David, and I'm ready. You know, bag packed, knife, fork, and spoon for the catering. But whether those two will ever be happy working together, as I say, I'd rather say no idea than unlikely. I live in hope.
Because I don't know if the question fell there, but I got the feeling that the Pink Floyd had stopped performing together, and there was an end point. But apparently, not necessarily then.
Oh, I think one has to say yes, we have, but you never know. As I say, I would have, when we did Live 8, it never crossed my mind that we'd be seeing Roger and David on stage together. So there could be another Live 8. I would hope if there was, that would work again.
Anyway, the three of you, yes. Yeah. You had a question, yeah. We'll bring you a microphone, just a second, yes.
Hi, Nick. Is there one particular person from history that you really admire? And if there is, why?
No.
These are great questions, these. I wish I'd asked you that myself. Who do you admire from history? And why?
And I suppose Xena Warrior Princess doesn't count.
No. It's the wrong sort of admiration, I think. But
I don't know. I suppose more recently, I'd say Nelson Mandela. Someone who is capable of generating sort of goodwill on a global scale and capable of marshalling that amount of support was sadly lacking, I think.
Well, self of Nelson Mandela, then there's not a huge number of people who are capable of bringing people together to select from. But Nelson Mandela, the question there? Yes.
Hi, I wanted to ask a little bit about the creative process. And for every song that became recorded and that I could now YouTube, how many songs only made it halfway through? So how many songs are sort of part of the lost tapes?
we're very short on lost tapes. I mean, we absolutely scour the vaults for things that we might have done that we might be. And to some extent, the Endless River is a massive of those sort of lost tapes. We were always a little bit short of ideas, so more or less anything got, if it wasn't good, it would be made good. And every scrap in the larder was taken out.
This is not what we want to hear.
Okay.
We want to hear there were 300 songs and
There are
only one was
300
chosen.
songs. Hang on a minute.
Yeah. And only one was chosen.
No, we always found it was quite a slow process, I say, finding material and making it good enough to get onto the record.
Well, look, we've run through our time. I was being told I mustn't go beyond time, but there's time for maybe one more question. So if someone's got... Yes, so it's the last question, so it's really got to be a good one. I don't want to... just down the front here, please. Yes, just to make a good question, just to make a good end point for our whole evening. Yeah.
Firstly, I'd like to say how fantastic the exhibition was at the V&A. Absolutely wonderful. But I would like to know, what song do you like to play live the most and why?
What song and why? It's got to be Comfortably Numb. It's the best because the dynamics of
hang
on. It's musically, it's one of the most interesting songs we've done. And it's because of the dynamics in it that actually the first verses and choruses they're actually almost half a drum part rather than a whole drum part. There's all sorts of bits missing, which I really like, that sort of emptiness. And then by the end of it, it's a full-on thrash-along guitar anthem, which what drummer could resist that?
Thank you very much. You did very well with your last question, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you to Nick Mason.